With so many Americans unemployed right now across the country, millions are struggling to put food on the table. The USDA says that today, more than 37 million Americans are food insecure, defined as a lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life. That's nearly 1 in 8 households in America that simply do not have enough to eat. In Houston alone, Catholic Charities was providing food to as many as 2,000 people every 6 hours. The New York Times Magazine is out this morning with a special issue and interactive online feature that documents 3 months in an American food crisis triggered by the coronavirus pandemic, entitled America at Hunger's Edge. Joining us now are the journalists behind the project, photojournalist and Guggenheim Fellow Brenda Kenneally, who set out across the country in an RV, capturing the routines of American families as they struggled with food insecurity, and journalist Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, who wrote a feature essay for the project and whose works often focus on the marginalized members of society. Thank you both. Brenda, I want to ask about how you set about to get the pictures and to get the stories that you got across the country, and the process that it took to really sort of get the trust to get people to be able to share their stories, because it's a difficult topic, and yet you were able to really capture it on a holistic level.
Hi. Well, I think that people realized how important it was that they shared their stories. And I think for a moment, the shame and moral fortitude of people has been sort of lifted, because in this country, we eat by our virtue. That's kind of, the template. And there's been a lot of people that have been receiving food from food banks for decades. These food security support systems have existed, but now there's a reason to talk about it. So I think the shame has been lifted, and I think that people are seeing rising prices, they're seeing scarcity, and the families that are the most vulnerable, of course, there's a hierarchy. The families that are the most vulnerable, that's accelerated more so during this time, and now families that have been able to keep it together are sort of experiencing a level playing field because of COVID. So people realize the importance, and I was very honest, a meal on the table, and I would photograph it, and I was invited in.
Adrienne, talk about, you're looking at who is hungry, the different segments of the population, whether it's a senior or very small children, and how it impacts them.
Well, I think, even in the 60s, when there was a lot of advocacy was required for programs that were really a very, a part of our national lives, like the school breakfast program and the school lunch program, were needed evidence that not just that kids were hungry, but why did we need to feed them, was because it affected their development and their sense of their brain development, their capacity to thrive, really. And the same goes for seniors. And what's interesting to me about the populations that are most at risk, which are, children and seniors, are there the two, groups of people in the culture that for periods of time are not active members of the labor force. And it's interesting, there's a heightened dependency in those seasons of life, and the nutritional issues are very serious in terms of health impact, and the distribution systems for those people, mainly schools for children. Over 2.3 billion meals per year are served to kids in school. Many kids get their primary nutrition at school. Certainly working families depend greatly on those things, and seniors get some of their lunch and meals in senior citizen centers, and delivery systems that are all interconnected. And I think under COVID, we saw how fragile those systems are. And I guess lastly, the other thing that's very important is that so much of the food bank system is dependent upon volunteers. Some over 50% of most of the people that work at food banks are volunteers, some up to 75% with Meals on Wheels. A lot of those deliveries are people donating their time. So, and many of them were senior citizens. So it all sort of became a perfect storm, really, that revealed what Brenda's saying, how long-standing these issues are and how dependent we've become upon the supplemental supports.
Katty Kay.
Brenda, the piece is great and the photos are incredible. One of the things that you've reported on, and I think we've heard before anecdotally during this COVID pandemic, is that a lot of the people that are now turning up to food banks are people who were or would have considered themselves in the middle class of America. And, you know, I think one woman tells you, look, just because I have a Volkswagen car that I can drive to the food bank doesn't mean I have any reserves. And I think this has really exposed how people, even in the middle class, are living paycheck to paycheck with nothing to fall back on. How are those people who, you know, are dealing not just with the hunger, but also dealing with the kind of the stigma, the newness of having to suddenly find themselves in a position where they're having to ask for food?
Well, I mean, I think if you're hungry, the Irish say hunger makes the best sauce. So I think if you're hungry and the food is available, you're going to put any pride aside and, you know, feed yourself and your family. But what I have seen and what I believe is that this is a problem that's just a symptom of the great wealth and income disparity that we have in the United States that is now paralleled and probably surpassed at this moment. I don't have the figures, the Great Depression. And I would say surpassed because the levels of what we consider wealth have definitely increased since that time. So people that have been working, that have been experiencing a system that was largely operable for them, are able to access the avenues of food and support in ways maybe that the generationally disenfranchised are not. And in fact, if you look at places like Parma, Ohio, where I see a picture flashing up on the screen now, they have a nutrition specialist at their school. They have folks in place that are ready to receive the government packages of fresh vegetables that are distributed because of COVID. And then I went to Greenwood, Mississippi, which has historically been disinvested in, and, you know, one generation, and in fact, people that were sharecroppers in their lifetime, and they were getting, you know, spoiled food from Walmarts. So the care and the will that we have to feed certain people and certain populations while marginalizing others is still in effect, but now we're seeing it in the ways that we're dealing with COVID.
Brenda Ann Keneally and Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, thank you both very much. We'll be looking for the new feature online and in the New York Times Magazine.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.